Come here. I want to tell you a story. Several years ago, I decided to finally get my ADHD under control by trying to get a task list going, a to-do list, a system that would finally work for me. It was probably the 15,000th time I tried to get a task list system going, because this would finally be the one, and this one would finally work, and this one would finally fix me.
It did not fix me. I do not feel fixed.
But I failed every time. Why? Because I introduced a lot of friction into these systems. I was never able to, for example, keep a monthly planner because of the rules and complexities in these systems, and because I added to these complexities myself. Here's the thing.
So what we tend to do is that we tend to create these involved systems that are pretty to look at and fun to do, and end up creating what I like to call friction within these systems. Now, let me back up a little bit here. A system is just a set of habits or actions that help you achieve an objective. In a best case scenario, they help basically automate tasks to the point where they become easy to do.
For example, I make the same breakfast every day, and through this I've been able to create a system that sort of kind of takes care of itself. When I wake up, I don't have to think about what I want to make for breakfast or how to make it, because it's the same breakfast I've been making for the past 6 years. Now, this breakfast system allows me to offload the mental load of having to come up with something to make every day. Now, here's the caveat.
What'd you say?
Caveat.
Caveat.
Oh, caveat. That makes no sense.
When we, and by we I mean people with ADHD or procrastination issues, try to create new systems, we usually go too hard. We usually make these systems too complex for what they are supposed to do. Systems are supposed to be easy, simple, one push of a button, one pull of a lever.
Otherwise, what you're creating is a Rube Goldberg machine, and we don't want a complex machine that's going to introduce friction between you and what you want to achieve. Let me explain what I mean by this.
A couple of years ago, I tried the whole bullet journal thing, which was lauded by a lot of people as the be-all end-all of creative productivity tools. The bullet journal. I spent probably 1 or 2 days learning everything I could about the bullet journal. I went out and I got the prettiest notebook I could find and a bunch of colored pens. One of the first tasks to start a proper bullet journal, I recall, was to number the pages by hand. So I spent an entire afternoon basically just handwriting numbers on pages, hundreds of numbers. It was great for my hyperfocus. It kept me busy. It was a thing to do with my hands. So I was feeling pretty good about the fact that this was finally going to work. But soon, I ran into friction.
Bullet journals have a lot of rules. You have to use this particular bullet for tasks, and this arrow for tasks that are delayed, and this other symbol for tasks that you're planning to do some other time. And then you have a section for tasks that you're doing today, and another section for tasks that you're doing next week, next month, or next year, and so on and so forth.
So it became this large, unwieldy, hard to remember set of rules that I had to follow in order to be able to create a task list. Already, this had introduced a lot of friction within the task itself.
Now, I had to remember all these rules if I wanted these bullet journals to be immediately useful. I had to convince myself that I could write on my very pretty notebooks, which is not something I've ever done because they're very pretty notebooks. Unless I'm writing like the final version of the great American novel, I'm never going to touch one of those because they're very pretty notebooks. Let me show you some. Now, I got this notebook about 4 years ago in one of my trips to Disneyland here in Paris.
It's a beautiful notebook, and there is not a single solitary word written on it because I love it, because it's so pretty.
There is not a single project in my head that I consider to be good enough to be placed upon the pages of this Stitch notebook. And that's friction. Pretty notebooks, write it down, pretty notebooks introduce friction.
Eventually, the bullet journal was too complex to be useful, and I dropped it. It took months, but I eventually decided to try something a little more simple.
So I went downstairs to the local office supply store and I got one of these notebooks. This is not an endorsement, merely a show and tell, but it's a notebook. It's a small notebook that I use to write tasks in. And there are no rules for it. I leave it here next to my laptop and I write tasks on it as I remember them.
So already I don't have to add the friction of I gotta look for the thing. I bought a whole bag of pens that I keep by my drawer, so if I lose my current pen, there's a new one right here. 0 friction.
And then I messed up because of course I did.
I decided in order for it to look pretty, I was going to buy a set of colored pens. Not markers, not pencils, had to be colored pens. So I went downstairs again, bought the colored pens, and I started using these pens as a way to categorize the tasks, since I was using this notebook as a global catch-all task list. Everything went in there, so by adding colors to the tasks, I could have an at-a-glance idea of what I had to do on a given day. So I started adding these colors to the task list, and that worked for about a week before I started feeling lazy about having to go and find the pens themselves, about having to pull the cap off and back on every pen I wanted to use. Eventually, through a lot of iterations, I ended up on the most basic of systems to remember what I have to do.
It's this small notebook with literally any pen. I have a small notebook and any pen will do, and I write down tasks as I remember them.
When I finish the tasks, when I turn the page, I either rewrite the tasks that I haven't completed or I forfeit the task forever. I don't keep them around. That adds mental load. Now, this has allowed me to remove small bits of friction from starting, completing, and getting a task to work. Why is this important?
Because when it comes to ADHD, the smallest bit of friction can stop you in your tracks. The smallest inkling of what could potentially become an excuse eventually will stop you. And you need to make sure that the systems that you do create have the least amount of friction possible within them.
Obviously, there's nothing perfect in this world. There's no way you're going to be able to create a system without friction. But there is a way for you to create systems with small, manageable amounts of friction. What I mean with manageable amounts of friction is, in this case, my task list goes into any notebook with any pen, and that's it. And they are both next to my laptop. It's the easiest thing to do.
Let me give you another example.
I tried for several years to get back on the songwriting saddle. I've been writing songs since I was like 11, and it wasn't until very recently that I could actually take a crack at recording and mixing at home by myself.
So several years ago, when I actually managed to give it a proper shot, I discovered that it was so difficult to actually get started.
And the reason for this was because there was a lot of setting up involved. I had to take out the audio interface and connect it to the laptop and open my recording software and then plug in the guitars and the headphones and the microphones, and honestly, I'm tired just thinking about it. So I sat down and had to think about for a few minutes and came up with ways to make the process easier. For starters, I keep the audio interface out at all times. It's right here next to my laptop. Second, I really did go in and watched hours of YouTube tutorials to learn how the software worked, how inputs and outputs are set up, and how to wire things correctly to get it right on the first go. Then finally I added these silly little labels. I can't see the ports in the back, so it was a lot of friction having to turn the device around, plug the microphone, and put it back down. These labels allow me to do it without having to move the thing. I also leave the microphone stand out where I can reach it without having to hack my way through old boxes and the 3 different comforters I use throughout the year. This helps remove small amounts of friction at a time to the point where I know enough to be able to set up my studio really fast, to the point where it's no longer a blocker, to the point where it's no longer an excuse. Because, God, I am attracted to excuses like a moth to a flame because of who I am as a person. But this helped. Proof of it is that I did indeed upload 3 songs on Spotify. For someone without any experience in music production and crippling perfectionism with a strong helping of ADHD on top, that's pretty good if I say so myself. And I have to say so myself because I really need to start celebrating my own achievements a lot more. But that's for another video. But that's the point of all this. People with low executive function need habits. We need systems, and these systems have innate amounts of friction that can be removed if we only think about it for a few minutes. And there are very nice pre-made systems out there, systems with colored post-its and nicely designed templates and all these complexity adding mechanisms, and that's all well and good and fun to use the first time. But I'm telling you right now, fun is great, but you need simple. The simplest, most basic form of a system is the only one that's eventually going to stick and work for you. Once you have that system working, then you can add something on top of that system. If I get the to-do list thing to stick, then maybe I can add something else on top of it and be like, okay, use the colored pens. But if it fails, sometimes you need to accept that the system works as is. Don't need to add anything else to it. Now we're not creating software here. Not everything we do needs a version 2.0. If your system is working for you, don't change it. Good systems like these are hard to come across. They are unicorns. It's very difficult to find a system that works for you. So once you do, hold on to it. What sort of systems are you trying to set up? What are you trying to accomplish? Which systems have failed before? Can you identify the friction in those habits that led them to fail? Let me know in the comments.